So we're going to continue using Pythagoras' theorem today, and today we're going to be looking at examples of calculating the shorter side to right angle triangles. So previously I mentioned you will need a scientific calculator to do this, but just a reminder, if you don't have one, you can Google scientific calculator and you will need the square root button. Okay, so if you Google it, that's a Google calculator, or if you turn your iPhone to landscape, if you've got one, it's the square root button that we're using, or if you've got a standard scientific calculator, it's this option here. And if not, then if you download the app, NCalcFX, if you search that up, then that is a really good one that pretty much represents this standard scientific calculator display. So we will be using this square root button again today. Okay. So previously I showed you this little diagram of where Pythagoras' theorem comes from. So if we're calling this side A and we square that, we create a square on the edge of that triangle, which is A squared. B to get B squared, and then side C is those two areas added together. So C squared equals A squared plus B squared. And this side C, that is the longest side of any right angle triangle, which is called the hypotenuse. So our standard Pythagoras' theorem formula, which was C squared equals A squared plus B squared, meaning those two areas fit into this larger area, that is the standard formula that we were using previously. So this is when we were trying to figure out what C is. So we're trying to calculate that longest side. But today we are going to be calculating the shorter side. So either side B or side A. So to do this, to calculate the shorter side, well, if C squared equals A squared plus B squared, then we can figure out one of the other sides by doing A squared equals C squared subtract B squared. Okay, and it works either way, because remember, it doesn't matter if you called this side A or that side B, vice versa. This is just the standard formula that we will use. So A squared equals C squared subtract B squared. So that larger area subtract one of the smaller areas will give you the shorter side squared. So let's put this formula into practice today. First example, we have a right angle triangle. Remember, Pythagoras only ever works with right angle triangles. Okay, so we have our length x here and our hypotenuse, our longest length is 13, and then one of our other shorter sides is 12 centimeters. So we have to calculate side x. And the formula we're using, because we already know the longest side, we know that we're going to be using this other formula to find out one of the shorter sides. So A squared equals C squared subtract B squared. So we're going to start by substituting into our formula, just as we've done previously. So our side A, we're going to call x, and then our longest side 13. So we've just replaced the C with 13, replaced the B with 12 to get this first line. It's really important that you are remembering that it is C squared, so that longest side take away the shorter side. So you should have the larger number first, subtract the smaller number, because if you had them round the other way, you would end up with a negative. But if that happens, then you know you need to go back to this line and put them round the right way. So we've got x squared equals 13 squared subtract 12 squared. We're going to find the square numbers. So 13 squared is 13 times 13 to get 169. 12 squared is 12 times 12 to get 144. We're then going to subtract the squares. So before we were adding, but now we're subtracting because that's what's in our formula. So 169 subtract 144 to give you 25. So we have x squared equals 25, but we just want to figure out what x is. So to get x on its own, we need to square root 25. So square root 25, so we're thinking what two numbers times together to give us 25? Or if you're not sure if they're bigger numbers, then you use that square root button on your calculator, then type in your number. But the square root of 25 is 5, and we're in centimetres. So that's our final answer. So all the steps are very, very similar to previously when we were finding the longer side. We're just using a slightly different formula, in that we are subtracting now to find one of the shorter sides. So using this example, can you pause the video here and give this question a go for yourself? Okay, hopefully you've unpaused and let's go through the answers. So we're going to be using that same formula, a squared equals c squared subtract b squared. Using Pythagoras to substitute in, so you should have your first line, x squared equals 10 squared subtract 8 squared. Then you're going to figure out the squares of those numbers, so 10 squared is 100, 8 squared is 64. Then we're going to subtract, so 100 take away 64 is 36. So that's what x squared equals 36, but we just want x, so we need to find the square root. And the square root of 36 is 6, and we're in centimetres. So well done if you got that. So let's go through another example. Again, we're using this same formula, a squared equals c squared subtract b squared, because we're finding one of the shorter sides. And we know we're finding one of the shorter sides because the length that is opposite a right angle is the hypotenuse, and we already know that, and that is the longest side. So let's first substitute into our formula. So c is 14, so we've got 14 squared, subtract, and then b is 5, so 5 squared. We're then going to calculate those squares. So 14 squared, so you in your calculator type in 14 times 14 to give you 196. And then 5 squared is 5 times 5 to give you 25. Then we're going to subtract those, so 196 subtract 25 is 171. That's what x squared equals, so just to find x on its own, we need to find the square root of that. So type that into your calculator, you would get a big long decimal number, but we're going to round your answer to 2 decimal places, so be really careful with your rounding. You should get 13.08 centimetres. So again, using this example to help you follow all those lines of working, can you please calculate the side x of this triangle? Okay, let's go over the answer. So your first line, you should have x squared equals 11 squared subtract 8 squared. Then we're going to calculate those square numbers. So 11 squared is 121, 8 squared is 64. We're then going to subtract to get 57, so x squared equals 57. We just want x, so we need to square root 57. And then round your answers to 2 decimal places, so you should have 7.55 centimetres. So well done if you got that. Okay, now for a little task, can you please pause the video here and calculate x on both of these triangles? Okay, let's go over the answers. So the first one, using the formula a squared equals c squared subtract b squared, so you should have x squared equals 25 squared subtract 7 squared. Find those square roots, so you want to type in 25 times 25 in your calculator, so you'll get 625. Then 7 squared is 49. Then you're going to subtract those. So x squared equals 156. X squared equals 576, but we just want to find x, so we need to square root that number to get 24. So well done if you got that. And that should say centimetres there, that's missing. So you must have centimetres. Next question, same formula, so x squared equals 18 squared subtract 3 squared. To find 18 squared, type in 18 times 18 to get 324, subtract 9. You then want to just subtract that, so 324 subtract 9 equals 315. That's what x squared equals, but we just want x, so you need to square root that using your square root button on your calculator. And then you should have 17.75 centimetres, rounding that to 2 decimal places, and don't forget your centimetres like I have done. So well done if you got those correct.